Hare Krishna. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatarine. Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utaparakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. We are summarizing chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We have heard that Bhagavad Gita is divided into 3 sections because there are 18 chapters. So the first 6 chapters are dealing with introductory spiritual knowledge, the nature of the soul, our identity as spiritual beings, the relationship between the living beings and the Supreme, and to some degree the workings of the material nature. The middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are the most essential content because there Krishna gradually introduces pure devotional service, especially in chapter 9, which is considered to be the most confidential knowledge. But at the end of chapter 11, Krishna mentioned that the devotees should be working for him only. He said, Mad karma krin mad paramo, mad bhakta sangavarjitaha, nirvaira sarva bhuteshu, yasa mam eti pandava. My dear Arjuna, one who is engaged in pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity, certainly comes to me. This apparently piqued Arjuna's curiosity because immediately Arjuna asks Krishna, this is chapter 12 now, which is entitled Devotional Service. He gets to the point. Arjuna uvacha, evam satati yukta ye bhaktas tvam paryupasate, ye chapyakshanam avyaktam tesham ke yoga vittamaha. He's asking Krishna, who is yoga vittama? Vittama means the person who knows best. Otherwise he would have said yoga vittara, which means somebody who knows better. But these are the superlative persons he's asking. And he's asking in particular about 2 classes. Arjuna inquired, which is considered to be more perfect? Those who are properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? It's a very simple question. It's a perennial question, but it's a very important question that has volumes of philosophy involved. But here Arjuna has expressed his question very simply. Who is better, the persons who are impersonalists or the persons who are worshipping your personal form? And Krishna gives him a simple answer to his simple question. He says, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Maya Veshya Mano Ye Mam Nitya Yukta Upasate, Shraddhaya Pariyopetas Te Me Yukta Tamamataha. The Blessed Lord said that he whose mind is fixed on my personal form, always engaged in worshipping me with great and transcendental faith, is considered by me to be most perfect. So in answer to Arjuna's question, Krishna clearly says that he who concentrates upon his personal form and worships him with faith and devotion is considered to be the most perfect in yoga. For one in such Krishna consciousness, there are no material activities because everything is done by Krishna. A pure devotee is constantly engaged. Sometimes he chants, sometimes he hears or reads books about Krishna, or sometimes he cooks prasadam or goes to the marketplace to purchase something for Krishna. Or sometimes he washes the temple or the dishes. Whatever he does not let a single moment pass without devoting his activities to Krishna. Such action is full samadhi. These are the persons that Krishna describes earlier in Bhagavad Gita as Atmarati, those who take pleasure in the self alone or in the spiritual alone. So, This has several things to consider because there's a strong tendency towards impersonalism, especially in the modern world, especially after Shankaracharya, who was preaching Kevaladvaita, pure monism and also impersonalism. So he goes on to say, Yetu aksharamanirdeshyam avyaktam paryupasate sarvatra gamachintyam cha kutastam achalam dhruvam. He's describing the nature of the conception of those who are worshipping the Lord's impersonal aspect, or those who are cultivating knowledge of impersonalism, the jnanis and the yogis. First, he's describing what is that process, and then in the next verse he describes how to attain that realization. Saniyam yendriya gramam sarvatra samabuddhayaha te prapnuvanti mameva sarvabhutahite rataha. Krishna says, but those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, fixed, and immovable, the impersonal conception of the Absolute Truth. By controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons, engaged in welfare of all, at last achieve me. So there are two classes of transcendentalists. They're called Mahatmas in the Srimad Bhagavatam. They may be impersonalists or they may be personalists. And Arjuna has very clearly asked Krishna, which of these is considered to be the most perfect? And Krishna has answered, maybe in a confusing way, because here he says, Yetu aksharam ityadi. He says, but. So it indicates there's some sort of a problem with the simple answer that Krishna gives. The problem is that we have a fixation with trying to go through this difficult process of impersonalization, impersonal realization. So Krishna describes why this is difficult, and he especially does so in the following verse. Verse 1 asks a simple question. Verse 2 gives a simple answer. Verses 3 to 5, they outline the process of impersonal realization, what it entails, and why it's considered to be inferior. Because someone might ask, why did Krishna give that simple answer, direct answer, that worshiping him in his personal form is supreme, if this is equally valid and also attains him? Someone can ask like this. So the answer is given in the next verse. Klesho dhikatarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukham dehavad bhiravapyate. So avyakta hi gatir dukham. The gati in this sense means the movement or the progress, the making progress in that path of trying to conceive of something that is inconceivable. That is very difficult for someone who is embodied. It's troublesome. Klesha. Klesha means actually trouble. So adhikataras, it's more troublesome among the two. That's why he was immediately stressed the bhakti path. But one can also attain the supreme by the impersonal path, if he wants to. So in the next two verses, Krishna says again there's again a contrast here. Although the point of being that although you can cultivate impersonal knowledge and come to that realization, he's not recommending it. And we may not even really want that even. Yetu sarvani karmani mayi sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayantu upasate. For one who worships me, giving up all his activities unto me and being devoted to me without deviation, fixing and engaged in devotional service and always meditating upon me, and who has fixed his mind upon me, tesham aham samudharta mrityu sangsara sagarat bhavami nachirat partha maya veshita chetasam. That means, O son of Pritha, for him I'm the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. Srila Prabhupada has often given the analogy, if you can take the stairs to the top of a building and you can take the elevator to the top of the same building, why take the stairs? It's obviously going to save you time and be much easier to take the elevator. That is this bhakti process. And therefore Krishna is again contrasting this bhakti process with the impersonal process. It's very clear that he's endorsing the bhakti path more than impersonalism. That was his answer when Arjuna asked him, yoga vittama, who is the person who understands yoga best? That was his immediate answer. Now, we've already described in the first 6 chapters we're discussing mainly introductory information about bhakti. At the end of that 6th chapter, Krishna has already also stated very directly, Yoginam abhi sarvesham madgatein antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamomata. He said, I consider that of all the yogis, the one who is the best is the person who is worshipping me with great transcendental faith. Sarvesham api yogi. Of all the yogis, sarvesham api yoginam. So, this information we've been given, and now we're hearing from Krishna about the qualities of the very best devotees, because there are different classes of devotees, even amongst those who are personalists, who have decided that we want this bhakti process, we want to love Krishna, we want to become pure devotees of Krishna. There are different stages and different classes of devotees. So Krishna is describing here first the completely surrendered devotee, the person who is a perfect devotee, you can say. And he is someone whose mind is completely fixed on Krishna all the time, without deviation. That's very clearly stated here. So that's not so easy to do, we may have noticed. And therefore Krishna says, well, we have some options here. In texts 8 through 13, Krishna is giving options for people who are not that surrendered. First of all, he says, Mayeva mana adhatsva mayi buddhim niveshaya nivasishyasi mayeva ata urham na sangshayaha. This is the topmost level that he's going to endorse here in the bhakti process, the very topmost devotee. First of all, mayi eva, he's fixed his mind, adhatsva, only upon me, Krishna says. Only. Eva means only. So he never thinks about anything else. And mayi buddhim niveshaya, also in addition to thinking about Krishna with his mind and with his heart, his intelligence is also invested fully in Krishna, which means he also understands Krishna very clearly. Most of us don't have these very high qualifications. They're very simple qualifications, but they're very high, and therefore they're very rare also. But Krishna promises, Nivasisyashi mayi eva. A person who has these qualifications, he will remain with me, always. That is a fact, and only with me. Ata urdham na sangshayaha. Therefore, even now and even in the future life, you should not have any doubt about this. This is his first recommendation regarding anyone who wants to take up yoga, bhakti yoga. Remember Krishna all the time, surrender to Krishna all the time, do not deviate from Krishna consciousness in any way. That is the best thing. Now he gives the options, other options, for those of us who may not come to that level, because generally this level of surrender is possible only for the sannyasis and those who are already liberated from all material influence, not for ordinary persons like ourselves. So, atachittam samadhatum na shoknoshi mayi sthiram abhyasa yogena tato mam ichhatum dhananjaya. Dear Dhananjaya, winner of wealth, Dhananjaya means the person who conquers wealth. And here Krishna implies for Arjuna, if you're able to conquer wealth, why don't you conquer your own wealth? The wealth that is within your heart, lying unseen. That's the implication here. The wealth being the spiritual, your relationship with Krishna, which is dormant and forgotten. So if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regular principles of bhakti yoga. In this way you will develop a desire to attain me. That's called Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. just by following the scriptural rules and regulations, such as fasting on Ekadashi and rising early in the morning for Mangalarati and chanting a fixed number of rounds on the Japmala and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and associating with devotees, honoring only Krishna Prasadam, worshipping the deity, living in Mathura or any holy place associated with the Lord's Leelas, and mainly associating with devotees, because everything is coming from that. All the processes of bhakti are going to be affected through satsanga. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu even said, Sadhu Sangha Sarva Shastra Koi, Lava Matra Sadhu Sangha Sarva Siddhi Hoy. Every perfection will be there if we are in the right association. So this is what Krishna is advising for most of us, I'm going to say. We cannot fix our minds in a sthiratara way, but we can follow the process of bhakti. It's not so difficult to do. To chant Hare Krishna, you need only a tongue and 2 ears. Even 1 ear will do. But this is what Krishna next suggests. Now Krishna goes further. You see that there's an option for everyone. He says, Abhyasepi asamarthosi. If you're not even able to do that practice of bhakti yoga, mat karma paramo bhava, then you should perform the superlative activities, which are from my interest. This is the meaning of mat karma parama. Mad artham api karmani, and you should do them for my benefit, not for your benefit. Gurdham siddhim avapsyasi. If you are doing like that, then you will also get perfection. This is very encouraging. Even if people cannot follow all the strictly the rules and regulations of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, that they can do this. They can do some service whenever they can, and they can do that without any personal interest, and they can do as best as they can. And Krishna promises here, Gurvam Siddhim Avapsyasi. You will also come to the perfect stage of bhakti, the perfection of bhakti, that is. So Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport, one who is not able even to practice the regulator principles of bhakti yoga under the guidance of a spiritual master can still be drawn to this perfectional stage by working for the Supreme Lord. How to do this work has already been explained in the 55th verse of the 11th chapter, which we've already referenced. Mat karamo bhava. The same word is used here, actually. Mat karma paramo bhava. And in the end of the last chapter, he said, Mat karma krin mat paramo. So it's the same thing. Just engage in Krishna's devotional service, practice that. If you cannot practice unflinchingly, then you can practice at practicing unflinchingly. And in this way, you will also eventually become perfect. Sadhana. Sadhana means practice, and siddha means, or sadhya means the goal of that practice, which is siddhi, perfection. So here Krishna is promising that. Now, someone may object, because someone always objects, no matter how easy you make it. Ataitad apyashaktosi kartham mad yogam ashritaha sarva karma phalatyagam tata kuryatatmavan. If, however, you are unable to work in this consciousness, then try to act giving up all results of your work and try to be self-situated. What does that mean? Yatatmavan means be in possession of your faculties, be sense-controlled, be a civilized human being, in other words. And sarva karma phalatyagam, work on that. If you cannot do devotional service or whatever reason, here Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport, it may be that one is unable to even sympathize with the activities of Krishna consciousness because of social, familial, or religious considerations, or because of some other impediments. If you find yourself in that condition, then this advice is for you. You can try to do something good, something pious. And our acharyas commenting on this verse, they say, for example, you can sponsor some sacrifice, Agnihotra sacrifice, or you can plant trees, or you can build temples and things of this sort, pious activities. That is also recommended here, because by the practice of giving up the fruits of one's activities, one is sure to purify his mind gradually. This is the point. And in that purified stage of mind, one becomes able to understand Krishna consciousness. At the end of chapter 7, we may recall, Krishna said, Yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvanvamoha nirmukta bhajante mandriha vrtaha. Those persons who are able to follow Krishna's advice, his initial advice, of perfectly following the regulative principles of bhakti-yoga, are the persons who are already pious. It requires piety. Practically speaking, we see this. There may be exceptions, and mercy can accomplish anything, prayer can also accomplish anything, but in general, the rule is that a pious person can do this. Impious persons cannot do it. So the question is, how do we become pious? And this is the answer. Here Srila Prabhupada explains. By practice of giving up the fruits of one's activities, one is sure to purify his mind gradually. It will take time, though. Just as the impersonal path is difficult and time-consuming, so the ordinary path of what Baladevi Dabhushan calls the Sanishta Bhaktas, those who are trying to first of all go through pious activities and then realize Atma Tattva, Atma Gyan, and then come to Bhakti Yoga. That takes a long time. So it's therefore the third option here. Or maybe it's the fourth, I have lost count. But the point is that in all the Vedic injunctions we find there is a common denominator. The common denominator is yajna, dana, tapa. And Krishna says twice in Bhagavad Gita, you should not give these things up at any time. Why? Because they purify the heart. Sacrificing something purifies the heart. Giving away something purifies the heart. Performing some austerity purifies the heart. And when the heart is purified enough, then we become pious. When we are pious, we understand Krishna consciousness. When we understand Krishna consciousness, we can follow Krishna consciousness. So this is what Krishna is getting at in this verse. So, then he says in text 12, Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasat. Even better than this practicing, or practicing to practice, whatever the case may be, is if you have jnana, you have some realization or awareness of what's really valid and true. Jnana dhyanam vishishyate. But better than jnana, or awareness, or knowledge, is to be able to focus on Krishna. In other words, better than practicing without understanding what we're doing is to practice with understanding of what we're doing. That's called manana. So that's the first thing he encourages. And he says better than that is if you have, through that realized practice, come to the stage where you can actually think to concentrate on God, to meditation, dhyana, through chanting his holy name, mainly, in this yuga. That is the process. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And now it's a very strange thing. He says, dhyanat karma palatyagas. But better than that is karma palatyaga. You should see a problem here. There is a contradiction here. Krishna just told us in the previous verse that if you cannot give up the fruits of your activities, or if you cannot engage in pious activities, then try to give up the fruits of your activities. But if you cannot do that, then he says you should understand. Dhyanat karma palatyagas. Karma palatyaga is better than even concentrating your mind on God. It seems contradictory, but it isn't. And there are different explanations for why this is said here. Some people say it's in order to demonstrate how the bhakti process is much easier than the gyan process. Others say it is to glorify the exalted nature or even the rarity of karma palatyaga in purifying the heart, or to underline, we can say, the absolute necessity of approaching bhakti with a pure heart, because otherwise it doesn't work so well. So these are all different explanations that are given, but he does say this here, dhyanat karma palatyagam. Even better than fixing your mind on God is to be detached. That is the safeguard against what we call kaitava dharma, or devotional service with an agenda. Mixed devotional service for trying to fulfill one's own purposes through so-called bhakti. That doesn't work. And why is this karma palatyaga considered to be even better? Tyagat chantiranantaram. You can be peaceful when you are detached from the fruits of your activities. And that peace is absolutely essential for Krishna consciousness. Without peace, no one can be happy, no one can even focus in this dhyana, as we've discussed here. So, now Krishna shifts gears again. These last several verses, from 8 to 12, he's been dealing with the options of those of us who are not maybe fully surrendered or unable to perfectly follow the bhakti system. Now he's focusing on some of the qualifications of those who endear themselves to Krishna. It's a very important section because Acharya's commenting on the final 8 verses of this chapter, chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita. They say that this applies equally to all classes of devotees. There are 3 classes of devotees, but according to Baladevi Dabhushan. First of all, there are those we mentioned already, sanishtha devotees. They, not really devotees in the conventional sense, but they would like to become devotees someday. And they do this by engaging in their ordinary dharmas, according to Varnashram system, as well as cultivating the spiritual awareness that should result from that strict practice of dharma. Karma and jnana, these 2 things. And then finally one may come to the state of practicing bhakti, but this person first wants to do dharma and he wants to do jnana also before doing bhakti. He's called a sanishtha bhakta. So he's the inferior bhakta. Then above him are 2 others. One is called parinishta bhakta. And this is a person who, he also follows his dharmas and he also cultivates jnana, but he only does so within the context of bhakti. He's exclusively devoted to the practice of bhakti-yoga. He doesn't want to entertain any other ideal. So he is setting an example for others to follow. That's the only reason that he is following Varnashram dharma, for example, or cultivating jnana. He's called a parinishta. And then finally there's the nirapeksha, which we've already mentioned. This is generally sannyasis, or avadhutas, those who are completely transcendental and untouched by the material energy, liberated souls. Now here, these final 8 verses of this chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita, they apply equally for every one of them. But it should be understood that these 3 classes of devotees have these qualities in differing degrees, according to the intensity of their bhakti, the tivrata of their bhakti. So let's hear. Adveshta sarvabhutanam maitra karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukhakshami santushta satatam yogi yatatma dridhanishchayaha mayyarpita manobuddhir yomad bhakta same priyaha. Krishna says, one who is not envious, but who is a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think himself a proprietor, who is free from false ego and equal both in happiness and distress, who is always satisfied and engaged in devotional service with determination, and whose mind and intelligence are in agreement with me, he is very dear to me. If you want to be dear to Krishna, read these last 8 verses of chapter 12. Of course, these qualities are not easy to develop, but they do come automatically by practicing bhakti with full sincerity, or as much sincerity as we can muster at least. Yasman no dvijate loko lokan no dvijate cha yaha harsha marsha bhayodvegair mukto yasacha me priyaha. Next he says, he for whom no one is put into difficulty and who is not disturbed by anyone, by anxiety, who is steady in happiness and distress, is very dear to me. So this is, you may have noticed, this is dealing with all the dualities of material existence. A pure devotee does not agitate others unnecessarily, and he's not agitated by others. This is the gist. Anapeksha shuchir daksha udasino gata vyatha sarvarambha parityagi yo mad bhakta same priyaha. A devotee who is not dependent on the ordinary course of activities, who is pure, expert, without cares, free from all pains, and who does not strive for some result, is very dear to me. A devotee is not ambitious, Srila Prabhupada says. That is sarvarambha parityagi. And udasina, it's interesting in his purport, the Srila Prabhupada mentions, udasina means freed from materialistic association. Yo na hrishyati na dveshti na shochiti na kankshati shubha shubha parityagi bhaktiman yasame priyah. One who neither grasps pleasure or grief, who neither laments nor desires, and who renounces both auspicious and inauspicious things, is very dear to me. Again, you may notice there's a lot of repetition here, not only because that's necessary, but to show that these qualities are not so easily attained. But shamashatro cha mitre cha tathamana apamaniyoho shitoshna sukudukeshu samasanga vivarjataha tulya nindastutir mauni santushto yena kena chitta aniketa sthiramatir bhaktiman me priyo naraha. One who is equal to friends and enemies, whose equipoise in honor and dishonor, heat and cold, happiness and distress, fame and infamy, who is always free from contamination, always silent and satisfied with anything, who doesn't care for any residence, who is fixed in knowledge and engaged in devotional service, is very dear to me. First thing that Srila Prabhupada mentions here in his purport, of all these things, Sangha Vivarjitaha, to give up the bad association. He says a devotee is always free from all bad association. Now, sometimes someone is praised and sometimes one is defamed. That's the nature of human society. You may have experienced it. If you haven't, you will. But a devotee is always transcendental to artificial fame and infamy, distress or happiness. This is what life has to give us. We get both, and we have to learn how to deal with it with equanimity. That is the whole point of these verses. And the main qualification that we can read between these lines about what characterizes a pure devotee. He knows how to deal with these things. He does not become overwhelmed. Otherwise, it is definite that we will become overwhelmed with death if we're overwhelmed with other things in the meanwhile. The main challenge in life is death. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what the score will be of how many good things we've done and how many bad things we've done. Everyone is going to die. We have to deal with that. It's not easy. So all of life's tests are meant to help us deal with this ultimate test. And ultimately they're all meant to deepen our faith so that we can practice. And finally Krishna concludes here. Yetu dharmyamritamidam yathoktam praryupasate shraddhana matparama bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. The one who is extremely dear to me, Krishna says, is someone who follows this path. Yetu dharmyamritamidam yathoktam praryupasate. As this whole chapter has delineated, shraddhana, with faith, and matparama, making me his ultimate goal. If you can do that much, to whatever degree, as we've already described, to whatever degree you can do that, then Krishna says you are very dear to me. And acharyas such as Sridhar Swami, who has also commented on Bhagavad Gita, they assure us that Krishna means by this that you too will come to me. It is guaranteed if you just become my devotee. This is why he twice says in Bhagavad Gita, Man manabhava mad bhakto. Madhyaji, Mam Namaskuru. 4 easy things we can do. This is what constitutes full surrender to Krishna. Full surrender to Krishna, according to Sridhar Swami and other acharyas, means full surrender to Krishna, but also full surrender to the process of Krishna consciousness, even if you cannot perfectly follow it in the beginning. There's a very encouraging and important purport back in chapter 3 that we may have heard already. Krishna says, one who executes his duties according to my injunctions and who follows his teaching faithfully without envy becomes free from the bondage of fruitive activities. And there Srila Prabhupada comments, an ordinary man with firm faith in the eternal injunctions of the Lord, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from the bondage of the law of karma. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, one may not fully discharge the injunctions of the Lord, but because one is not resentful of this principle and works sincerely without consideration of defeat and hopelessness, he will surely be promoted to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness. So these are just a few ideas we can glean from this most exalted chapter 12, entitled Devotional Series, which concludes the middle section of the Bhagavad Gita. It's fitting that it's dealing with bhakti-yoga. And then in the coming installments of this series, we will hear the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. But this is chapter 12, bhakti-yoga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.